get started. Zoom stuff. Okay. So, I suppose we do not have a chairperson, and so, hey Laura, can you hear me?
Sure can.
If we do not have a chairperson, am I the one who just opens the meeting and calls up the roll call? Or
I would say that's the best way to do it.
okay. I will bring the meeting to order at 6:12 p.m. And first item on the agenda will be approval of minutes of December 2nd, 2021. Any comments? And members.
Brooks, do you want me to call the roll?
Oh yeah. No, I've never done this before. It's a lot of pressure.
Here.
Anthony Lowe,
Here.
David Lurie, Tom Peard,
Here.
Vicky Polit. Actually, you say it, and then I'll get it.
Polachicchio?
Polachicchio. Okay, great.
Here.
Doug White,
Here.
Joe Zane,
Here.
Amanda Fishburne.
Here.
Okay. Since you're via Zoom, I'll have to mark you as absent. But I'll make a note that you were in attendance virtually. And then Brooks, if we do the chair and vice chair election first, you don't have to keep going with the meeting. You can let them do it.
Okay. So I guess if we want to do appointments, an election of a chairperson and a vice chairman first, do any of you wish to nominate a chairperson?
Who's longest tenure?
I would say that I probably am.
Yeah.
Okay, I nominate you.
Second.
Let's be clear, we're talking about, you were nominating Doug White, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep, that's fine.
You're okay with this, Doug?
Sure.
Okay.
Be the chair? All right.
And by that logic,
All in favor?
I'll do vice.
Aye.
If someone wants to nominate me.
Sorry, was that, did everyone vote for that?
Yeah, so we have to say aye if we agree, which I don't see why we wouldn't, so.
Laura, you kind of broke out during your all in favor. Is
Okay, so all in
Officially
favor for Doug White being the chair?
Aye.
Aye.
Any in opposition? Fantastic. Okay, so Doug, do you want to take over and conduct the vote for the vice chair?
Sure, sure. Do we have a nomination for vice chair?
I nominate Thomas Peard.
Second.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
That's nice.
Any opposition?
That's nice of you guys. Thank you.
Great.
Congratulations.
Congratulations,
Thank you. Thank
everyone.
you. Thank you.
you get the special chairperson.
Yeah, okay.
So.
See how smoothly this runs?
Exactly.
Oh, yeah. All right, Doug, do you want to take it to approval minutes next then?
Sure. Well, do we have introductions of, I guess we do have some new folks we want to probably introduce, right? Or we want to do that?
Well, we
Approval
approved minutes
minutes?
is the next on the agenda, so
Okay.
then
Yep.
introductions after that.
I will not make that because I wasn't here, so I won't make a motion to approve the minutes about.
Well, I make a motion to approve the minutes of Thursday, December 2nd, 2021.
Second.
And then just to clarify, even
Doug, you can call for the vote. Yeah, sorry.
oh, sorry, you're allowed to vote on the minutes even though you weren't here. Our city attorney has clarified that in terms of voting. So,
Okay.
just as a heads up.
And Doug, you can just say all in favor.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
And I think you say any opposed, and then
Any opposed?
motion.
Nope. Motion
Okay,
carries.
motion carries.
Oh, we're really good at this.
And
Next, we're all learning.
so then next item.
Introductions?
Okay. I guess Anthony and Vicky, do you want to do?
I'll let Vicky
introduce
have the
yourself?
honors first.
I'm Vicky Polachicchio. Did you need a background on me or?
If you want to.
Sure.
but-
I've lived in Birmingham over 30 years. My entire family lives here, and then I've been an attorney for 17 years as a prosecutor.
Cool. And Anthony?
I'm Anthony Long. I've lived in Birmingham for 26 years. I practiced law for 26 years, and I'm general counsel for a local law firm that is also a national law firm. I'm a litigator and have been trial counsel for a number of large companies over the years nationwide. And I took over the general counsel position for my firm about 4 years ago. And I'm looking forward to working with the rest of the group.
Cool. And then we all know Joe Zane.
I was formally appointed as a regular member at the same time Vicky and the others were appointed, so no longer an alternate.
Welcome to full time, Joe. So, I guess with that, Doug, you want to go review of the agenda?
Sure.
Not much. Any comment?
All right, so we've been through the appointments already. Any unfinished business?
No unfinished business.
Unfinished business, and we'll have one item for new business tonight, and that'll be the overview in front of you that I think Brooks will take us through.
Yep, and so, being that we have some new members and a lot coming up on the agenda this year, working with our city consultants, we wanted to do kind of an overview of the purpose of the Multi-Modal Board, what we tend to focus on, and how we want our meetings to operate, and topics that we'll be facing in the upcoming year and years to come. So, with that, I'm going to be flipping through the slides, and our city consultant, Brad Strader, is going to be giving a presentation. So,
Evening, Brad Strader from MKSK, and you'll be hearing from all of your Transportation Board staff tonight, either via Zoom or here. And we usually would do, at the beginning of the year, a survey of the members to say, what do you want to be hearing about? But we thought this would be a good refresher of the role of the board and a little bit of best practices and foundational documents. And then we've got, at the end, kind of a list of some of the things we think are coming up on the future agenda, because the Multimodal Transportation Board kind of influences the agenda and adds to it, so we can talk about that. I know one thing that we talked up, the last time we had a meeting was speed humps and traffic calming, and that was going to be tonight's agenda, but we kept kind of putting off the meetings until we had the new members appointed, but we will be doing that either the next meeting or the meeting after that. But we've got that training program ready to go. It just depends on when we got space available on the agenda. So real quick, this is the outline of the things we'd covered, and this is very informal. So unlike some of the other boards and commissions here at the city, we're mostly an informal group, so feel free to ask any questions as we go through. The next slide, everybody will introduce themselves, but I want to talk briefly about the role of the Multimodal Transportation Board. I think Brooks sent out some information on that. The main thing is the Multimodal Transportation Board is sort of the input organization for anything transportation related. So we'll talk a little bit about that. There used to be a traffic committee, like in a lot of cities, and this board was kind of changed to be the Multimodal Transportation Board, with the emphasis to be on bicycling and walking or pedestrians. So it used to be just traffic and stop signs and parking permits, but it was expanded to focus on multimodal with the emphasis there. So we'll talk a little bit about that, a little bit about some of the foundational documents and plans that the city has put together or that this board has put together. And then just kind of a brief refresher for decision-making protocols and how the agendas were set. And then we've got a little bit of a teaser of some of the best practices. And then depending on your interest now or in the future, we can and the agenda, we can add best practice training on other things. So in the past, we've had the Regional Transit Agency has come and presented. We've had MDOT come and present. We've done training on best practices in design and mobility-oriented development and so forth. So the idea here is every once in a while, like maybe quarterly, we have a training program on sort of new and exciting things in transportation to make sure you're aware of. And it says discussion at the end, but you can ask questions at any time. So maybe we'll just, everybody introduce themselves on our team. Yes, Doug?
I was just going to ask if multimodal transportation is still the appropriate name for the board, based on.
I would say so, especially given our multimodal transportation plan.
Sure.
Because like Brad was saying, it used to be transportation, traffic engineering, some parking, but with the multimodal transportation plan, and this kind of, protecting, more pedestrians and bike lanes, being more all-encompassing of transportation, I think that's where they pivoted to that kind of title.
Sure.
So.
And there are only a few multimodal transportation boards or transportation commissions. So I've worked with Ann Arbor when they started theirs 4 years ago. They have a transportation commission that looks at the same thing. I think Rochester Hills does, only Grand Rapids. But generally, in many places, still called the Traffic Committee, like in Troy and Bloomfield Hills, and they don't deal with the expanse of things that we deal with here, so.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, a major charge of the Multimodal Transportation Board within the city code is implementing and reviewing the Multimodal Transportation Plan and how that relates to different infrastructure projects within the city. And so, on that in introductions, I'm Brooks Cowan. I'm with the Planning Department. I'm kind of all around with the boards. I think I've presented to 11 or 12 city boards now. And because I think Birmingham has about 30. So I do a little bit of everything around here. And, if you have any questions about this board, you can shoot me an email. Scott Gruey. Scott, are you on Zoom?
I saw him on there, yep.
Not letting me start my video for some reason. It was on a second ago.
Cool. Scott, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, it won't let me start the video. Apologize, but Commander Scott Gruey, I'm with the Birmingham Police Department. Now it's asking me to start the video, so sorry about the confusion there. Again, Commander Scott Gruey with the Birmingham Police Department. My role really for your purposes, if you have any questions regarding street signage, any traffic control devices, speed studies, stuff like that, crash history, I can run all that and get that for the board when we're reviewing streets for safety improvements or any kind of redesign or reconstruction that we're doing. Additionally, any resident that has concerns about parking on residential streets or parking downtown, or maybe a stop sign request in a neighborhood or something, that would come through me. I would prepare that to bring to the board for your ultimate recommendation to the City Commission. So if you have any questions for me in the future as far as speed studies or traffic counts on streets, stop signs, any type of traffic control device, feel free to reach out anytime.
Thanks, Scott. All right.
And maybe Scott Zelinski, maybe introduce yourself, and Jim. Jim was here. But.
It looks like Jim might be in his office on there, so give him a second. Yep, he's coming on.
Jim Surhai, you're up. Tell us about yourself, Jim.
Jim Surhai, I figured I'd take my mask off and go virtual, so. Welcome tonight, and I'm a Salted City engineer, and so I'm the staff representative from the engineering department, and we work on, we bring to the board upcoming projects that we have in the works, and to, get reviewed for the various multimodal aspects of it, and try to put the best projects out there that we can.
Thanks, Jim. All right, Scott Zelinski, you're up.
And I'm Scott Zelinski. I'm your assistant city engineer. Combination of me and Jim, we present the projects to you guys and evaluate some of the ideas that you have on how feasible they are with the projects. Sometimes there's limitations given the size of the road or other various restrictions, but we work with the consultants to try to provide the best solutions in our designs towards adapting the needs of the multimodal board. We'll always be bringing you the projects as far in advance as possible so that we can get as much of your input as, to add to our plans as we go, so.
Cool. Thanks, Scott. Okay, Julie, are you on Zoom?
I don't see her name on here.
Don't
so
see her?
She's
I know she had to drive back from a meeting from Lansing, so she's probably caught in traffic, is my
Right.
impression. So Julie is with Fleece and Vandenbrank. They are our traffic engineering consultants with the city. They help review a lot of the different traffic designs, stoplights, things like that. They also review a lot of the developments in town and provide commentary on that. And next up will be Brad.
And there's another, Jacob is another person that sometimes comes here from Fleece and Vandenbrink. And I'm Brad Strader again from MKSK. And I'm a transportation planner. And we also have landscape architects and planners at MKSK. So sometimes others from MKSK are here, especially landscape architects when we're dealing on design projects. So, all right.
So, lots of input.
Lots of input, yeah.
Yes.
So what does the Multimodal Transportation Board do? This is sort of a combination of what the ordinance says that form the Multimodal Transportation Board and sort of the reality of some of the things that you've been doing the last couple of years. The main thing is being the advisor to the City Commission and other boards and commissions on transportation. Sometimes you coordinate with other groups. One of the reasons the Multimodal Board was placed was to help promote the best practices in multimodal design. So we're always looking at what are the Michigan manuals, what are the national manuals, what are some of the best practices, and we bring that thing to you. The term often used the last 12 years or so is complete streets. So the Michigan DOT adopted a complete streets policy, and it's sort of a national movement. The city passed a resolution for complete streets, and that's sort of the same thing as a multimodal board. It just means streets that are designed for all different modes, safe walking, biking, traffic, vehicles, trucks, transit, and so forth. That's what a complete street is, but kind of looking at the design and especially safety for all the different, they call it modes, the way of traveling. Scott Greavy or others bring recommendations to you or comments to you to get input. Sometimes official action is needed or recommendation to the City Commission. Other times it's just input to the engineering department or the police department or the planning department. Occasionally there may be recommendations on administrative regulatory decisions such as parking, as Scott Greavy said. We occasionally get groups, either residents or groups of residents that are interested in transportation, and they're directed to come to you first to say, here's what we're looking for. It's yield signs or stop signs or approved pedestrian connectivity or change the parking program around our neighborhood or so forth. So some of these are worked out through staff, but they often come to the Multimodal Transportation Board and give feedback. And then there may be particular requests from residents that are brought to you to get either direction or make a recommendation. And just a few other things. So there is a multimodal transportation plan. I think it was done like 6 years or so ago. It's probably
2013.
So it's kind of probably a little bit due for an update. The city is going through a master plan update now, and I think the idea was to get the master plan, which is done for the planning board and then the city commission, and then the multimodal plan update will come probably to you maybe in 2023 or something. But there are some recommendations that are multimodal transportation related in the master plan. But we'll want to probably even this year dig out the multimodal transportation plan. We've been keeping a list of things that the board has pointed out in the last couple of years that next time we update this, these are things to change. Recommendations often to the city engineer, to Scott or to Jim. We'll have a couple examples in the presentation tonight, but there's a capital improvements plan and repaving and reconstruction. So that plan those plans are brought to you in the upcoming projects and say, what do you think the changes will be? And some of them, it's very straightforward. We're doing repaving. Other chances, there may be opportunities to advance the multimodal transportation board's ideas. And we'll cover that a little bit later. Occasionally, the planning board will send to you development plans, especially if there's a lot of transportation-related items to it, but we haven't seen one of those probably in about 3 years. Julie Kroll from Fleece and Vanderbrook reviews all the site plans and their traffic impact studies to sort of forward on the recommendations to the planning board, but occasionally that would be brought to you, especially if there's maybe a disagreement between the applicant's team and city staff or consultants. And then maybe 3 or 4 times a year, Scott Greavy will bring you requests for parking permits or overview what's going on with parking, what's going on either during construction or something else, and we'll get input from the Multi-Modal Board on making decisions on parking. And anybody on our team that wants to add anything, let me know. This is just an overview of the Multimodal Transportation Plan, so if you haven't looked at it in a while, I would say look at the plan and look at the recommendations. And again, if you see things you think would be a good item to update for the next multimodal plan update, I said get that to Brooks, and we're keeping a running list so we sort of have a game plan of changes for next time. There's a lot of city plans. So your plan is the multimodal transportation plan, the master plan that I mentioned, that's going into, I think, the 4th year of reviews and so forth. There's a Triangle District plan. Triangle District is the east side of Woodward from Maple down to Adams. There's a Rail District plan for the east side. And there was sort of a draft of South Woodward plan. There's a Woodward Avenue Corridor Improvement Plan that was put together maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and I think Jana Ecker in the manager's office is resurrecting that now that the property value, it's a way to capture tax assessments in the Triangle District and on Woodward Avenue to further public improvements along Woodward Avenue.
Brad, we're actually doing an update on that, and it's going to City Commission on February 28th.
Okay.
So
I saw Jana was working on it a
Yeah.
couple months ago.
Oakland County asked us to update that, so that's my update.
And
on
then capital improvements plan is done annually, and then there's also special studies or sub-area studies that go on, so
that. A lot of sub-area studies.
a lot of sub-areas. So there, and this is just like the 7 I could come up with, but in addition to the city commission, you get the planning board, but there's other boards and commissions that you may interact with. One would be like the parking advisory committee when the parking study was done. So the multimodal transportation board had comments on the parking study. So you occasionally will have information from these groups that will come before you. So, and then there are a lot of other agencies having a role in transportation. So we've had speakers from SMART, which is the transit agency, the Regional Transit Authority, which does sort of bigger scale transit in Ann Arbor and Detroit metropolitan area, the Michigan Department of Transportation that controls Woodward Avenue, the Road Commission for Oakland County that controls some of the major streets around the city, and then the city of Bloomfield Hills, city of Beverly, or village of Beverly Hills, the city of Royal Oak, and the city of Troy all have their own plans, and occasionally we interact with them because we've got projects that are either on border streets or projects that run to their borders. So there's
CN
also
Railway, I think, is another stakeholder.
Pardon me? Yes.
CN Railway, they own the.
CN Railway, yep, and we have, I don't know how active they are. There is a Woodward Avenue Action Association, and they were very active until maybe 4 years ago, and I think Oakland County is trying to resurrect that group again.
Yeah. And, in the years to come, we want to, I think, do a better job of keeping this board updated with regional occurrences in transportation, and just have that as a part of our agendas of, this agency related to Birmingham is recommending this, which, spans, multiple cities in the area, so that, when items come that are related to the larger region as a whole, we're kept updated on that.
All right, a little bit of like a quick overview of board protocols. This is the board membership, so 7 members are appointed, and then we can have ex officio members, which I think are Brooks and Jim, and the staff are kind of are additional ex officio, but I think Jim and Brooks are the only ex officios that give input, but they don't have a vote. And then we have 2 alternates that are permitted. So we don't have that for a lot of boards and commissions in Birmingham. But the alternate members can attend the meetings, like one of the members is tonight. They can sit in the absence of a regular member, but the idea is to sort of let Brooks know if you're not going to make it. So if there is an alternate member, we need the alternate member to have a quorum that Brooks can let them know, so they'll be here in person. Or if there's a conflict of interest, which doesn't really happen at the Multimodal Transportation Board very often, but if somebody believes there is a conflict of interest, let's say the law firm you work for is representing the developer, so maybe that might be a potential conflict of interest, and the alternate member would step in that case. And the ordinance that formed the Multimodal Transportation Board lists some guidelines for characteristics that are listed on here. The idea was to have one be a bicycle advocate, one to be an urban planner, architecture, or something in the design. The idea is that you're representing different parts of the city and so forth, and I think that that's sort of a guideline when the city commission looks for candidates, but I'm not sure we check off all those 7 boxes
It's okay.
currently. And then effective decision makers. So the agendas are set by city staff, and we'll give a teaser on that at the end of the presentation. But all these things we talked about, if Brooks gets comments from another staff, or if Scott hears a resident or a neighborhood complaining, or if they contact the city manager's office about a stop sign or pedestrian crossing or so forth, the agendas, we look at what the agendas are, what we can bring to the multimodal board, what information is needed, and so forth. And occasionally we'll ask for input early on to say, here's where we're going, how do you think this project should proceed? And others will come to you with a recommendation for either you to make the final decision, or you would make a recommendation to the city commission. You can add agenda items. So Brooks is the main person to set the agenda. So if you got agenda items, let him know. Our team that we introduced tonight, we meet every other Monday afternoon to go through the upcoming agenda items, and new things are coming in, and kind of the priorities change based on what's urgent. But we do set the agenda every couple of weeks, and new things come up, and some things are handled administratively, other things kind of crop up.
Yeah, Brad, if I can add in, if you see any cool news articles about things going on in the region or the country that you think should be added to the agenda, that's a common practice within all of our boards. And so any article or publishing, you can email it to me, and I'll put that on the end of the agenda packet. And we can point that out at the end of the meetings and talk about it if you'd like. So.
Now, one thing on here, so occasionally we're talking about alternatives, like should we do a sidewalk here, should we change the intersection or so forth. So it's probably, a lot of that information can be presented here, but we think it's important for you to go visit the sites in advance of the meeting. And you should have the packets in advance. Sometimes we'll talk about this and get some direction from you, and then you'll know what to go look for, and then at the next meeting we'd make a decision. So we'll work with you on that, but I think it's helpful if you go out and look at some of these sites. Because we can pull up Google Earth, Brooks does that, or we can have photos and so forth, but sometimes you really understand things a lot better if you just kind of go experience it yourself. So I guess I'm saying sometimes the role of the board is beyond just coming to the meeting, it's also going out and taking a look at things. Sometimes you'll see us out there where we're out as a group, or meeting with MDOT or something else on South Eaton or on Forest Avenue and Woodward and so forth. So that's what we're out there doing. So in terms of the meeting, so I guess we would call it like, we don't have a lot of residents come here, but the chair may want to have rules for speakers, especially if all of a sudden we have a big audience here, and we've had that come up when there's a road reconstruction project talking about moving lanes and so forth. So it might be good advice for the chair and vice chair to just, if we have a big group, you can set limits, like 3 minutes, but you got to announce it at the beginning of the meeting and say we want everybody to talk. So I don't think we have to have rules for speaking at every meeting, but it's just if we know there's a hot item, we might kind of refresh your memory in advance or have some talking points. But there are times where you might have to set limits on speaking so everybody gets a chance to hear. Some of the rules for decision makers is it's always good to communicate the procedure, especially if you got a big group, to have comments go through the chair. So if you got questions of staff or the audience or different members, to have it go through the chair. And I'd say it seems maybe a little bit formal that way, but if you have sort of a formal practice when you do have a kind of a tough crowd and you're more used to it, it would make the meetings go better. So a little bit of, I think we're pretty informal with this group, but you might have to be a little bit more formal occasionally. Other things to keep in mind is you need to deliberate and open, so you can't be like texting back and forth or whispering. It's a public meeting and everything has to be spoken for at this meeting room. It's important to express opinions when people want to see your vote. They want to know what are your backgrounds, what are the considerations of the recommendations that you're going to make. And then, again, I think I covered it already, but certain items require action in terms of city commission vote, and Brooks will handle that for you. Other things are just informational. And if you're not sure, just say, are we making a recommendation or are we just providing input? So.
Yeah, and to comment on that, especially if we have a hot topic item coming in with lots of people, you'll see this with other boards where they will, express their opinion and then say, I will be, right now I am in support of this because of reasons X, Y, and Z, and, expect to vote yes. Albeit, it's okay to change your mind if you say that, but then somebody later on says I'll be voting for this because of X, Y, Z, then you might say, well, you've convinced me otherwise. That happened with the Board of Zoning Appeals 2 months ago. And so, on hot topic items, the city does prefer that just to get it out from everybody before the vote.
So it's an open discussion. So for instance, because I'm new and I say, this is what I think this should be, but then someone who's been on the board for a long time can say, well, like 3 years ago, we had the same issue. We can all jump in and kind of educate each other and help each other.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Right.
Right?
Yep, right.
Okay.
And all the
because-
new members have brought up some new ideas that others didn't think of, and other times like, well, we've looked at that, and so a little bit, well, we've looked at this and so forth, but that's part of being a new board member, and you're also going to bring some new thoughts that the old board members don't have. So it's a sharing of collaboration, and we've seen, I think, others change their mind at the vote and say, all right, you guys between staff or the other board members have convinced me I need to look at this a little bit differently, or, let's postpone an action, let's go look at it again, but I'm going to look at it with a new perspective.
Okay.
So.
That's great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
there's usually interchange of questioning, asking staff, discussion amongst the board, questioning for the consultants. And then, as we're kind of getting closer to a vote, they will generally say, I feel like I would support because of these reasons.
Okay.
Right, now, there's not already a motion prepared. We'll work together to craft a motion that we all, that we're all comfortable with, that we can bring to resolution.
Yep. So, all right, Brad, back to you.
So,
Next slide.
Yep. So I called it Bob's Rules of Order. Jim said, let's go through the Robert's Rules of Order, and maybe some of you or attorneys deal with it. It's pretty elaborate, and this is more like Bob's Rules of Order, so we sort of rely on Robert's Rules of Order, but it's a more informal, the way that we run the meeting and have the discussion and interaction. So hopefully you're comfortable with that. But again, it's sort of up to the chair to determine the level of formality that we use. It is important to be respectful for members of the audience and each other and so forth. So just a good reminder of that. When we had people joining with Zoom, it got a little tricky once in a while where we couldn't keep track of who's a board member versus staff or consultants versus residents. So it's kind of nice to have live meetings again a little bit, but be treating everyone fairly and consistently is what we try to do here. And I think we already covered the last two items there. So, and deliberation, generally we would give a recommendation to you or at least some background and either get input from you or say this is what we're looking for. And then you might have questions for us. You might have questions if there's an applicant here or something, questions for them that goes through the chair. And that's pretty much it. As Doug said, we can either craft a motion or we do it together. And again, it's pretty informal, so that I think the next slide goes over motions, but basically you just need to have somebody makes the motion in a second, which you've already done this evening, and then make sure it's clear what the request is, what the action is that we're looking for. And then typically the reasons for the action, and then we can talk about conditions. So sometimes we just go through details of what the conditions are. Julie Crow was here talking about, I think it was Southfield and Maple, and the Multi-Modal Board had a lot of thoughts about the intersection, and so we went through like a long list of different alternatives that Julie needed to look at. We were looking at South Eaton, the same kind of thing, that different members of the Multi-Modal Board wanted different things to look at, and so at the end, we went through everything to make sure everybody was clear on the motion of what was be expected, so when she came back at the next month, we could check off that we had looked at those items. So just real quick on some of the key city plans. This is the 3-year unimproved streets map. So this is a page, bless you, this is a page out of the capital improvements plan. This will be coming to you probably at your next meeting or the one after that. And it's to be the 3-year planned unimproved streets. And then Jim or Scott will go say, here is what we're going to be doing in 2022. Here's what we're going to be doing in 2023. Here's kind of our thoughts on if there's multimodal aspects of this. Sometimes it's just repaving a street. Other times, well, the multimodal plan or the master plan says there should be a bike path here, or there should be a sidewalk here, or something else. So and some of these might have a lot of discussion to look at the design. Other ones are pretty straightforward. And then we also have a capital improvements project. So this is just a broader range of areas. Like you see in the middle there is South Old Woodward. So this board, I think, had 4 meetings on the South Old Woodward design earlier last year. And so this would be not just repaving projects, but reconstruction projects, changes to intersections and so forth. So it's not minor things like adding a yield sign or something else, but a capital improvement project would be where there's like a capital investment of some type. Trails would be another thing that would come back to you. Trails would be one I should have mentioned earlier. Sometimes the trails go to Multi-Modal Board, but also the Parks and Recreation Commission. So that's another body that I maybe didn't include in that slide. So here would be an example. This is Latham Street, which is Dixon or 14 Mile up to North Lawn. And the Multi-Modal Board, this is set up to be repaved in 2022. And the idea was the Multimodal Transportation Plan said, well, this is a street that should really be redesigned to slow vehicles down and better accommodate pedestrians. So the Multimodal Board went through a series of drawings and ideas. I think we had at least a couple meetings to come up with like a couple of sketches. This is an example of how the Multimodal Board influenced the design of the intersections to kind of tighten them up, because these tighter radius makes speeds go a little bit slower and safer for pedestrians. And then we started looking, I think the next slide maybe, Brooks, is also looking at what can we do for non-motorized travel. So I think if I remember, Latham is like 32 feet wide. It's one of the wider streets in the city, and there's a lot of people that walk and bike along Latham. But and we looked at bike lanes, we looked at putting in paint striping or other things. We looked at adding sidewalks. You can kind of see on here, but there's some pretty mature trees, so some areas the sidewalk could be added and other areas not. So the Multimodal Board approved the intersection and said, let's really talk to the residents and say, what do they want to see? Do they want to see sidewalks? Do they want to see a bike path? Do we want to move curbs around? So that would be an example where we brought it to you as sort of an initial project, and the Multimodal Board wanted the staff to really look at more extensive alternatives than we had looked at. And the next one would be Pierce Street. Another one, Pierce Street is by elementary school and a park. This was set up for a repaving project. It's kind of tight in there. And the draft master plan and the multimodal plan both had recommendations there on the left here saying, it's sort of not very precise what recommendations, and basically said this should be looked at again in more detail for what the really needs are. And so the Multimodal Board looked at different alternatives, suggested that staff work with the school district. And again, I think Scott went out with Kristen Bowden from our office and looked at some of the ideas the Multimodal Board had. Can we put a sidewalk here? Could we remove some on-street parking to have a bike lane? And looked at what's practical, because this is another, everything in Birmingham is sort of complicated. We've got tight conditions here. The sidewalk is pretty close to the curb line. There's mature trees between the sidewalk and the curb and so forth. And it produced different options for the multimodal board. I think this also went to the multimodal board like 2 to 3 times. Anything else on that one, Scott?
The short version of that last one is that we found that there's some severe complications with Pierce, just in how, again, the tree lines with mature trees line up, current health of those trees, the amount of space we have along the edge of the right of way, like you said, it's a skinnier section of road, and it presents problems at school pickup times and stuff. So conceptually, we were trying to evaluate how to widen the sidewalks possibly for the bike lane instead, because of children. We don't want to put risk of putting them into traffic. So for now, it's kind of like, it's more of a resurfacing project, and we're gonna try to do a couple different ideas to test out some things with use of limiting like where parking is and stuff, but short term, there's not a solution that actually handles the bike lane. These are some of the complications we'll run into as we're trying to implement stuff, but it's through your guys' direction that we kind of evaluate different options. Like, not to say we don't look for some ourselves, but that's how it goes.
And then, again, we try to keep you up on what's new in transportation. This is just a list of things that seem to be ever-changing. Like we've talked, one item that is electric vehicle charging. So when the Maple project came in, it was talked about and said, well, we're not going to do that. We're not ready. Phase 2 talked about it a little bit more and said, we're not going to do that. In Phase 3, the Multimodal Board said, I really think we need to have some electric vehicle charging stations. So we went back and forth. The Parking Advisory Committee agreed, but said, let's don't invest a lot of money and time. We don't know. Let's focus on electric charging vehicles in the ramps and not on the on-street spaces. And the decision was made to add some electric vehicle charging at the south part of Old Woodward, south of Haynes. So I think there's 4 or 5.
We're at least putting in the infrastructure to
for
be able to
that.
put it in.
Muffins and so
It's
on.
not
Yep.
officially going in as electric spaces yet, but it'll be set up to be able to be added.
Yep. So that would be a change directed by the Multimodal Board that said, let's look at new mobility. And we also have on Phase 3 places for scooters and other things that weren't in Phase 1 and Phase 2. And then best practices overview. So this would be a training we did about a year and a half ago, and talked about, because the Multimodal Board said, well, what are the best practices in pedestrian crossings? And let's take another look at our crosswalk guidelines and so forth. So we went through a program that showed all the different pedestrian crossings that are there, different bike facilities, and then traffic calming is one that we did a year and a half or so ago. But the Multimodal Board said in particular they wanted more information on speed humps and what some of the other communities have done in speed humps. So that'll be a training that'll be ready next time we have an agenda available. So,
You know, to your last slide about new ideas, to Brooks's earlier point about if you come across articles or thoughts about different things that you want to share with the rest of the group, that's the diversity of this group that can bring some of those ideas to light, so.
Yep, and
encourage that.
yeah, and we'll usually talk about that at the end of the meetings on communication items, so.
and one of the things that a couple board members brought up a couple meetings ago was, let's talk to Ferndale. They're doing some things maybe we can learn on Ferndale. So I think Brooks and Janet have been talking to Ferndale and some of the other Woodward communities and sort of banding together to see what is and isn't working with Ferndale, dealing with MDOT. We had a resident that came to a meeting to present or compare the difficulty crossing Woodward in Birmingham versus other places. And so I think the city staff has been working with MDOT on Woodward Avenue. And Brooks mentioned, I think, the sort of the road diet checklist and other things. We had, unfortunately, a second fatality at Forest and Woodward. And so the city staff has been working with MDOT on a solution for that road as well. Sorry.
So I kind of had a question, probably useful for the new members as well. To what extent, so you set the agenda, but if we want not just to have share an article, but want to talk substantively about a specific item, whether it's a traffic pattern at a specific spot or, new mobility solutions in a certain instance, do we talk to you? Is that not really, because, up until now, I haven't really felt comfortable with saying, hey, we should really talk about this, but, I mean, sometimes there are things that we probably should talk about.
Right, and so, sending articles is one thing, and then during the communications part of the meeting, items not on the agenda, a lot of times they might say, hey, I feel like this is a really interesting topic that I would like to bring up. Say they wanted to learn more about best practices in electric vehicle parking or bike parking or scooters or something like that. The board will talk about it, bring it up with staff. We do have to kind of spread out agenda items. And so what we can do is say, we get a general consensus from the board, and the board says, yeah, that's definitely something we want to discuss and look into. And then we can put that on the action list. And then, there is a bit of staff saying, okay, like, these are priorities coming from city commission, coming from the city manager, and then these are also items that we can discuss that the board wants, and we try to fit them all in a reasonable timeline.
Yeah, we had maybe 3 years or so ago, 2.5 years ago, one of the board members said, I think we should talk about autonomous vehicles and how that's going to influence the way we design city streets. So we brought in a couple experts on autonomous vehicles and gave a presentation on that as well. And I think new mobility, around the same time, we put together a session on new mobility and brought in another outside speaker to spend about 20 minutes on the latest of new mobility and how that might affect transportation. So a lot of the things that you deal with are day-to-day, short-term improvements and stuff, but we're also trying to stay ahead of things in the beginning or in the future, so it might influence the way we're doing things. And so bring that up, and we can decide we can talk about it generally, and if people are interested, then we can put it on as a training program or discussion item, or bring an outside speaker in too. So.
Okay.
But all the dynamics of these discussions need to take place in the public forum, correct?
Yep.
Right. And we would call it like a study session item. So, just be, I guess, cognizant of, we do have directions from the city manager and city commission. And so, sometimes I'll just be the bad guy and say, well, we have to do these first.
Yeah.
We can't do the cool ones.
Yeah. Yep.
City commission stuff is cool too.
I mean, we got to figure out whether it's supposed to be a stop sign in the spot.
Right, right. And so, we do have to balance priorities on the agenda, and if you have a problem, you can blame me. That's what I'm here for.
I appreciate it.
Yep. So, I guess any other questions on best practices and getting those agenda items for discussion?
We just got a couple more quick slides here.
Cool.
This is just a refresher, or if you aren't that familiar with it, there's a lot of different bicycle facility designs, and it's always kind of evolving, but this is kind of the most common type is a Sharrow, which we have a lot of those in Birmingham, a bike lane, which is usually a 5 foot wide, might be striped that way. It's a lot safer, and you get more people to do a protected bike lane, like is shown here, where there's a buffer between the bike lane and either parking or the travel lane, or a cycle track, which is a 2-way, which we have one of those on South Eaton, just south of Maple. So those are the typical 4 types of bike facilities that we have, other than sharing the road where there's no Sharrow.
And for the new members, you're welcome to go for a bike ride around town with me. That is staff time, I think.
Is that tomorrow?
We'll get the fat tire bikes out for the snow.
I was just talking to somebody from MDOT today, because my office is in Midtown. We're next to Cass Corridor, and when the bike went in, he said no one is going to use the bike lane, and I was a little skeptical too, and now it's like used all the time, but I bet today it wasn't used. So in the winter, throughout the winter, it's mostly used, I'd say, all but maybe 5 or 6 days a year. So.
Yeah, I think 3 board members got out in the fall to ride.
I've been on the Brooks bike tour before.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's fun. Definitely in discussing decisions for South Eaton and other bike lanes, we definitely encourage you to go out and ride.
And occasionally we survey the residents, or in that case, we surveyed people that are on the bike and say, what are your thoughts about this bike lane? And the survey results are brought to the board to say, well, here's what the public says. So we've used other forums to try to find what the users in the community or the public thinks and bring that to you, to have you help us figure out from that information, does that affect our design, so.
So, you know, fun field trips in this board.
So this is like 2 or 3 slides of a longer training program that we produced a couple of years ago, but this is just bump outs. So you might see bump outs or these pedestrian crossings in the downtown, and what's the purpose of those? Well, it's to slow vehicles down, make it improve safety for pedestrians when they're crossing the street, alert drivers of different ways that there's a pedestrian crossing. So sometimes you'll see flashing beacons or signs or other things to kind of alert drivers. This just came up because one of the residents by like the market or a couple of restaurants, whether it's the park north on North
Park?
Woodward. Yeah, in that area, that pedestrians were, in that neighborhood, were complaining that they feel that crossing North Old Woodward has become very difficult. There used to be like a lighted crosswalk where all the lights, I thought them kind of distracting, but they would light up on the pavement where you were crossing. And so that was removed. They've tried different things, and Scott Greavy got calls from some of the residents saying they want this board, or at least the staff, to take a look at pedestrian crossings, like just south of the farmer's market, to see if there's better ways for pedestrians to get across North Old Woodward. So that's where you start looking at pedestrian crossings and bump outs and so forth to try to lower the distance the pedestrians need to cross. Some of these were done on Lincoln a few years ago, and some of those worked and some of them didn't work. So sometimes these experimental things have to be tested or monitored to see if they're really effective or not. This was an example of crossing along Woodward. So the city spent a lot of time in the last 6 months working with MDOT, because Woodward in Birmingham is pretty difficult to cross. 4 lanes in each direction, pretty high speed, 45 to 60,000 vehicles a day and so forth. And we're working with MDOT to try to make it easier to get across in terms of more pedestrian crossings, signals and so forth. So there's always a trade-off, because if you signalize a crossing of Woodward for pedestrians, then cars are going to back up. So it's a balance, especially when it's an MDOT road, to kind of balance making pedestrian safety and easy to cross versus the level of backup along north and southbound Woodward. So.
And the one thing I did learn here is there was once a underground crossing at Woodward,
I was thinking of an elevated
long since
line.
shuttered, that
Yeah.
we asked to take a field trip there, but they said we're not going inside.
Apparently, I heard it was closed because there is like some fear of people stealing your children. Kind of, there was like a kidnapping scare in the 70s. And so they just.
I think there is
filled it in.
actually, though, infrastructure, I think it's still open. They have infrastructure that
There's
goes through it.
currently I think it's a sewer line that goes straight through the old tunnel, and so therefore it is no longer, you couldn't open it back up if you wanted to, because you can't get physically through there anymore.
And I think it doesn't
you have
meet
to
the
clean
new
it out.
ADA guidelines.
North of Maple at like Oakland, right?
Yeah, it's at
Okay.
Oakland.
Yeah.
They used to have underground tunnels or even overhead crossings and stuff, but because of ADA and slopes and stuff, then it becomes like at the zoo, if you've ever.
Possible
It's
to
in,
accommodate all
I think
that.
the feeling is Woodward is, it would take a very large structure, and then it would be so large that people would continue to cross the street. So the cities look back and forth at the cost of it versus who would use it and so forth, but those are things that this board could look at again. And the other thing on Woodward is people don't want to go very far out of the way, so if it's even 1 block to the north or south where they want to go, they're probably still going to cross Woodward, so.
It's exactly like at Forest where, 2 people have gotten hit. They don't want to walk up to Maple.
Yeah.
So the good news with that, though, is we have made huge progression with MDOT in getting that redesigned and getting pedestrian lighting and stuff like that all updated there. They're supposed to be getting some temporary measures in place. I haven't been over there to look at what they've got going so far yet, but they've started putting poles in and that sort of thing to be able to put up temporary warning stuff, but we are working on a long-term redesign for getting like marked crossings all the way across and some light control stuff, so,
Yeah, they're looking at putting a traffic light in there that is pedestrian
yes.
triggered.
And the master plan's still considering 3 lanes there, right?
For facts of the road diet and stuff,
Yeah,
yeah.
because that'll bring, 12 feet of pedestrians have less that they have to cross. So
Yep,
if
that
we
would
do that,
definitely
so.
make things easier.
Okay.
So the last time we probably met with the board where we talked about that. So Brooks and I had a call with Julie and Janet Ecker in the manager's office yesterday. So Julie's going to do some, they call it synchro modeling, but computer modeling. What happens if you remove a lane in each direction? We're not saying what that lane would be for. Is it going to be for bikes or sidewalks or green infrastructure or transit? We could talk about that later, but just to see what would happen if you had 3 lanes instead of 4. So, and then we're going to share that information with MDOT. So we are moving forward with that. And I think we've had, for like Forest Avenue, we had 2 meetings in the field with MDOT, and we've had 2 Zoom meetings with MDOT to kind of make it slow progress, right, with MDOT staff.
And the county's starting to back us too, as far as getting going on that. So it's like a snowball. It's slowly growing.
They're talking about, like, Ferndale has 35 miles an hour through Ferndale, and MDOT's reluctant to make 35 miles an hour through Birmingham because north of I-696, they view it as a different.
It's more of an arterial lane right
The,
here.
the traffic
Yeah,
counts are much
so-
higher.
Isn't it like 40% higher or something, wasn't it?
It's
I think it's
impressively.
38 to 40
Yeah,
in
that's what I remember from the
Ferndale.
last meeting, so.
And here it's like 48 to sometimes 63. So
Okay.
from 696 to the north, we're like 40% higher or something than Ferndale, right?
And,
You said it's like a snowball effect of, how long has this discussion been going on in narrowing Woodward at that area?
well, so the discussions on narrowing Woodward have come and gone over, my understanding, a much longer period of time. The fact that we've got them to do a road diet study is impressive enough to start with, and it's probably still going to be years to try to get this moving forward.
It was already years. You have their attention now because of pedestrian deaths.
Yep. And
Well,
So you have to like hold on to their attention.
Yep. So
Okay.
as of right now, our first focus is updating those pedestrian crossings and getting some control there. With that, Jana is spearheading the campaign on getting the road diet accomplished and seeing where we can go from there. That's why we're involving other communities as well, because the more communities involved gives us more firepower, basically, with MDOT. So,
What other communities?
like Royal Oak.
And they want the
Ferndale.
same thing?
It's, I can't speak for exactly where the other communities are at on it.
We're trying to
I know-
involve them in the
Yeah.
discussion.
Well, I
And,
mean, the interesting thing is that Ferndale and Birmingham are the only 2 cities on Woodward that are bifurcated by Woodward.
By Woodward, right.
Royal Oak is
The city
not.
itself, right.
So that's why the discussion is that we're more like akin to Ferndale than we are to, say, Royal Oak.
Correct.
And so the real issue is MDOT wanting to move metal versus,
That's
you
their-
know, people in Birmingham wanting to stop people getting hit by cars.
right. And not to defend MDOT, but that is their job, right? Move metal. But we keep reminding them with every discussion we have that, you know, we're a split walkable community and that this is a major concern of all of our residents, our commission, our city staff. And so, yes, we are 100% batting for you guys and keeping pushing forward on it.
Well, and another thing to keep in mind is that the Triangle District Plan is dependent upon the ability for people to be able to cross Woodward.
Yep.
And people are not going to want to, I mean, I've lived here for 26 years. People do not want to, when they have new families, move on the east side of Woodward because they don't want to have to cross Woodward. It is preferential to live on the west side of Woodward. And so to bring the city together and make the Triangle District fall into line with the rest of Birmingham, we need to come up with a plan that will allow people to safely cross Woodward. Whether that's over Woodward, whether that's under Woodward, or whether that's a road diet with a speed reduction is what we're going to be challenged with.
So if I could just comment on Vicky's remarks, there has been some discussion in the past. However, this is the first time that the city of Birmingham has approved an official formal resolution in support of the road diet to MDOT. And so, you know, MDOT looks at that as a signal of, okay, city commission gave the green light. That's actually a requirement of the road diet checklist. So that was approved a week ago, 2 weeks ago. And so that is a a motion to really get the ball rolling, or the snowball rolling quicker, as Scott said. So, with that, we are having discussions. But I do want to rope it back to Brad with any other.
Yeah, so this is the list
other
right now
items?
of upcoming agenda items. So if you have any questions, so some of these are time sensitive, like the 3-year road improvements. Others can kind of slide if new things come up or more urgent. But if there's anything, you have questions on this, but this is like a partial list of things we have for 2022. So we have traffic calming would be in the next meeting or two. And then the 3-year project, I think Reading Road intersection at Woodward. Reading Road came to the Multimodal Board about 6 months ago, but the intersection with at Woodward is a requirement of MDOT, or we have to get input from MDOT. So that's probably on your next agenda, or maybe the one after that. But if you have any other questions, we've talked about South Eaton, that'll be coming back to you as well. So we've got a pretty long list of topics for the next few months.
Yeah. Fun. Was that it?
That's it. Yeah. Any other questions for us? Welcome to the new members.
Thank you.
And Joe, thanks for joining full-time now, and we really appreciate your time and interest, and we're always available if you've got questions in advance of things, or if you've got ideas, let Brooks know, and if you have any questions for us tonight, let us know now.
At any point, do we get feedback from commission as far as the things that we've discussed and, motioned on and so on? Do we get feedback from them?
Sure. A lot of times the feedback comes when an item comes from the Multimodal Transportation Board. We discuss it. We make a recommendation to City Commission. If they're okay with it, they'll generally approve it. A lot of times the feedback or commentary comes if they may be in disagreement with certain elements of the recommendation or the plan. It may come to City Commission. They'll talk about something and they send it back to Multimodal Board. I would say that is generally the time where Multimodal Board gets the most kind of impact or input from City Commission.
I think the only one I can remember in the last few years was some members of the City Commission wanted the street design to change to narrow the streets. So if you had a 32-foot wide, like Latham, everything would go at, I think it was like 26 or something. And so the Multimodal Board had kind of mixed opinions, sent it on to City Commission. City Commission didn't agree and wanted you to look at it again and send it back to the Multimodal Board. And then it went back to the City Commission, and the public kind of came to the City Commission and objected, and then it just kind of sat and nothing changed. So that was one where they didn't agree with the recommendation. They wanted more detail. They sent it back. The Multimodal Board revised and sent it back to City Commission. That's the only one I remember coming back. So.
Otherwise, a topic comes up during their discussion and they say the city should look into this. This is an item that the Multimodal Board would look into in regards to roads or pedestrian crossings. And so that's generally our feedback from City Commission process. So. Anything else? Or
Yep.
comments?
Your comment?
That was your easy meeting, and it's going to be harder now the next few. So.
I don't know when the appropriate time is to do this, but maybe like the people who didn't introduce themselves, who already know everyone, like say hello and let me know.
That's a good idea. And maybe if you could, where in the city generally you live would be, that's always helpful, because if we're, like when Katie was on the Multimodal Board and we were looking at that area, I'd say, Katie, I'm going to be out here. Do you want to look at this with me or something? If somebody was on Eaton Street that I think Brooks did a bike ride with, so if there's a particular area that you're interested in, we're all interested in the whole city, right? But if you're in a particular area and you really know the details, it can be helpful for us to pick your brain on something too. So if you maybe go around the room again and just let us know where you live generally would be helpful to me. So.
Want to start on this side of the?
Sure. I'm David Hocker. I've been on the board for a year, and I represent Court Lake Estates.
Yep, I'm Doug White. This is my second term on the board here, and I live over in the Torrey neighborhood, over in the Rail District. And you're going to love it here. You'll learn a lot.
Anthony Long, I live over on Benneville, just east of Woodward. south of Lincoln. But I've lived here for 26 years, so I've lived downtown, I've lived out by Pierce. I built a house over on Smith and Cummings. I got some Cummings paved. It was an unimproved roadway, and did a petition that successfully got that paved with the corner lot owners. So I'm familiar with the St. James area, and but I do now live over in the Torrey district.
I guess I'll go. My name is Joe Zane. I live in the Triangle District on Chestnut, so that Forest Crossing is my crossing of Woodward, unless I decide to walk to Maple. And I've lived there since 2017, and you know I used to rent, and now I own the house, so that's plan on being there for a while.
I live near like the smaller fire station off of near Chesterfield and Maple. And I mean, I grew up in Birmingham, so my dad actually built a road that we lived on. We've lived in all different parts of Birmingham, and I've just kind of walked. I am not a biker, just for the record, I'm not a biker. I've ridden my bike a lot, but I'm like, you know, I'm like the little old lady on the bike, scared all the time. But I love walking. I've literally walked this entire city. So, and I'm just very familiar with it from all through just being a kid to now. Yeah, I'm very familiar with everything around here. It's been a long time.
I'm Tom Peard. We're neighbors. I live on Suffield over in Cordon Lake Estates.
Walk there.
Okay, yeah, we have a puppy. We just got a puppy. We got a COVID puppy, so I've been walking him around, so a lot, because that's what puppies need. So I've been getting more familiar with the streets, and I do ride my bike quite a bit too. So that we talk about Oak Street and going up the hill by David Lurie's house. Man, I walk that up that all the time. I'm retired from my career. I'm the design engineer guy up there. So I worked in the automotive industry for 20-something years, and I used to work for Denso. I still work for Denso a little bit, do some part-time work for them. But gave that up a few years ago, and we had our second child. So I'm married to a lawyer, so.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Anyway, welcome to the board, you guys, and you'll learn a lot. I'll say there's a lot more stuff that gets thought about and considered, and there's a lot more background information than you ever knew out there on a lot of these different traffic and pedestrian issues. So soak it in and ask questions, and welcome aboard.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Brad, for the presentation. That was great.
So now we'll open it up to the public for any items not on the agenda, either in the room or on Zoom.
Yeah. Scott, you see anyone raising their hands?
Nobody is raising their hands currently.
All right.
Okay. Brooks, any miscellaneous communications?
No miscellaneous communications from me.
Okay. So our next meeting will be March 3rd, 6 o'clock?
6 p.m.
6 p.m. Yep.
Quick, before we adjourn, is that miscellaneous communications? Is that our chance to bring up things that we'd like to hear about in the near future?
Yeah.
Okay. So I would like to bring up two things that I'm interested in just looking into. One is the role of 5G and what kind of infrastructure we have, and how the kind of, like, are we ready to be able to deal with the kind of data that's coming out, or if the city's not really considering how that interacts with our vehicles and everything. So, you know, as a person whose background is in connected vehicles, I'm definitely interested in what the city is doing to look at that.
Okay.
And the second thing, I've just always wondered if there's any room for low-speed autonomous shuttles. You know, May Mobility has that downtown. I'm sure with COVID, a lot of that's changed, but in terms of the parking pressures that have happened, that have shown themselves for the past several years, and the fact that the two sides of Woodward aren't connected, and we have these kind of disparate areas like the rail district, and you have downtown. I feel like that could be something that it's at least worth looking into. So not anything urgent, but I think putting the bug in people's ear right now, I'm curious
Sure.
what we could do.
I believe I can comment on the second part. Are you referring to like a shuttle that would kind of do a loop around Birmingham and connect to the different parts?
Yeah, that would be the
So
idea.
our draft master plan actually proposes something like that, and also proposes a route. I know the planning board discussed it a little bit. However, I do believe that that would fall under more of this board's purview. And so once the master plan, if and when the master plan is approved, as Brad said earlier, we'll most likely be looking to update the multimodal transportation plan, and we would be able to pull recommendations from that master plan, of which you're talking about. So it's on the radar.
That's great. I think that the more we could pull parking pressure from downtown and let people walk downtown, the more enjoyable the whole thing is. The fewer cars downtown and more walking. I think that's a good thing.
Right.
So.
Right. I like it.
And I can speak briefly towards the 5G comments. There are communication companies that are slowly starting to work towards getting 5G infrastructure placed in town. It's slow, but it's coming, and it's a matter of time more than anything with everybody. We actually just had to update some permit stuff in regards to the state requirements for 5G implications, so.
Okay. Because I think that there's a lot of valuable potential for the city to be in the loop and get a lot of information from the data streams that are coming off of cars nowadays. So, but I don't know what we're doing about that.
Yeah, we don't have a direct, city connection type thing going on yet, but as far as the infrastructure, it's slowly coming in from cell providers, so.
Does it strike anyone else that the concerns about crossing Woodward and autonomous vehicles are related, maybe somehow?
Very much so.
That seems like part of the potential solution there, don't you think?
The
Just thinking out
alternatives
loud.
are you either go under Woodward, which nobody wants to do.
Yeah.
It creates problems with safety, with security. Going over Woodward is not something anybody wants to do because
Ugly.
it's ugly.
Yep.
And so,
Woodward is ugly.
the one most important thing that I see from this board is to be able to bring the two sides of Birmingham together, which has stalled the rail district plan for years, and would open up a city that has autonomous vehicles solving that problem.
Yeah.
Would open up, I think, a great deal of opportunity and a great deal of planning. I think it's a great idea.
The autonomous
Just be
solution
cool.
is actually speed related as well, because your autonomous vehicles aren't going to be going 75, 80 miles an hour down Woodward.
Right.
And they're going to have a lot of distance between themselves and the next vehicle. So I think by electing to try to ratchet down the speed is kind of working in tandem with preparing for autonomous vehicles.
It also solves the parking problem, the parking structure problem. Triangle District needs a parking structure before anybody wants to invest in that area. If you have an autonomous vehicle wrapping, or a couple of them wrapping the city on a regular basis, then you solve that issue.
You could even look at, just stepping back, I love the idea of autonomous vehicles, but even just a shuttle is like the interim solution. You could do a lot without necessarily but I think that there's stuff out there that's worth looking into. So, yeah.
Cool.
There's a lot of other cities in the area that you can look at as to what they've done. I was up in Traverse City, and they do have underneath their roadway a tunnel. It's short, but they have a tunnel to get you from a parking lot to where people want to go run by the lake or what have you. And so, is that the right solution for Birmingham? Maybe not, but, and then you go out west, you go to Vail, they have a shuttle that goes around the city and solves the problem of connecting that whole city together. And I think it's a great suggestion, Joe.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep, so we look into that. All right, anything else for communication? No, good. Doug, you take it away?
We need a motion to adjourn?
I think you can just,
Or I could
meeting
do
adjourned.
Second.
Just adjourn?
We get your big hammer.
All right, 7:27.
I think that's where, this is Bob's.